Welcome back to another episode of Marvel Man 901. So today I'm going to talk about the Spider-Man storyline known as Kraven's Last Hunt. This is from 1987. So before I'm going to start talking about the story in itself, I'm going to just explain a little bit about a few things. So Spider-Man in this issue is actually wearing a black suit, but not the symbiote suit. It is shortly after he has basically discarded it. Ned Leeds had died after being killed by the Foreigner, and later on he will be proven to be the Hobgoblin. Okay, so this story is in 6 parts, and it starts with Web of Spider-Man issue 31. Basically, it all focuses on Kraven, or at least most of it. And Kraven, or Sergei Kravenov, as you might know, he is obviously a great hunter. Russian in origin, and apparently he basically just goes into how he ended up in America overall, actually. How his parents had been fairly high ranked in Russia, well, Soviet Union, I guess, but basically had to move to America. So now, about 70 years later, so yeah, Kraven is apparently over 70 years old. He basically blames all bad things on Spider-Man, the Spider. Yeah. Basically says that his mother basically had gone insane and apparently killed herself. How his father had been extremely depressed and all by everything that happened to them and all that. And it all obviously affected him quite a lot. Anyway, so he basically consumes spiders and other stuff like that to basically become Spider-Man. And he goes off to basically show that he's better than Spider-Man overall. So he goes out to hunt Spider-Man in the night, and one of the many motives that he has is, of course, the humiliation of being defeated by Spider-Man over and over and over again. Eventually, Kraven finds Spider-Man fairly quickly and drugs him with a kind of a poison dart thing. So Spider-Man is trying to get away from Kraven naturally, and Kraven basically hunts Spider-Man down, traps him, and then actually shoots him. And this issue actually ends with him burying Spider-Man at the Kravenov estates. So it continues in Amazing Spider-Man issue 293, where Kraven is now actually wearing his own kind of Spider-Man suit. He is basically out to prove that he is superior to Spider-Man, and he feels that his metamorphosis wasn't actually entirely complete, so he basically had to consume even more herbs, roots, juices, and more poisonous spiders to basically become the Spider. He's pretty much very delirious from all the venom and stuff like that in the spiders, and he's basically going a bit insane. And he's basically sees the Spider as all the bad in the world, everything that caused basically all the undecency in the world and all that stuff. And of course, there's a small side note here: Vermin is actually kidnapping women in New York and basically bringing them down into the sewers where he lives, and basically feeds on the women, kills them, eats them. He's actually been dubbed as the cannibal killer. This will naturally have some larger importance later on. So it continues in Spectacular Spider-Man issue 131, where Kraven is basically out to show that he's better than Spider-Man, so he's basically hunting criminals as Spider-Man. And he basically beats them fairly easily and actually kills some of them. He's losing himself more and more into the whole Spider persona as he's basically taking over, but he tries to basically still be Kraven and is basically trying to fight the both personas in a way. He later on decides to fight Vermin, the cannibal killer, as he basically sensed that he was around and basically found him. He reasoned the fact that if he could defeat Vermin, something that Spider-Man alone could never actually defeat, as previously Spider-Man had to fight along with Captain America to defeat Vermin. So if he could defeat Vermin, he was better than Spider-Man. He goes into the sewers, finds Vermin, fights him, very brutal fight actually, and eventually actually defeats Vermin and then brings him to the Kravenov estates. So in Web of Spider-Man issue 32, Spider-Man wakes up in his grave after dreaming some awful nightmares about a deceased Ned Leeds and Kraven basically killing Spider-Man and shoving him down into the horrible dark place and bad things basically. Eventually though, he crawls out of his coffin with the suit still on and heads into the Kravenov estates and actually learns that he has been in the grave for 2 whole weeks. And of course is furious about this and terrified at the same time, and it's also extremely confusing for him, which is kind of natural. He eventually managed to get home to MJ and feels great to see her, but still feels kind of hollow. He feels like he has a lot of unfinished business with Kraven naturally, so eventually he goes off to find Kraven. So in Amazing Spider-Man issue 294, Spider-Man confronts Kraven and basically beats him several times over, but Kraven is basically just standing there smiling and basically says that he has won. Spider-Man can't do anything to him because he has already won. He showed himself to be better than Spider-Man and all that. So basically he takes Spider-Man down to basically where Vermin is captive in an electrical cage, basically. He basically gloats that he has defeated Vermin, something that Spider-Man never actually had managed to do, and basically shows himself to be better than Spider-Man. So eventually Kraven releases Vermin to force Vermin to fight Spider-Man, which naturally he does. He believes that Spider-Man was the one that actually defeated him earlier on in the sewers, naturally, as Kraven was wearing the same suit. The fight is pretty vicious, as it usually is, as Vermin naturally is kind of a rat man kind of guy, very brutal in itself. Spider-Man, in a way, kind of has Vermin defeated, but he, in his compassion, basically decides to not hurt this kind of victim, actually, the way that Vermin actually is. This naturally is weakness that Spider-Man has, in a way, as Vermin defeats Spider-Man. Kraven stops the whole fight, basically stops Vermin and basically tells him to leave, which Vermin happily does. Upon seeing Spider-Man's compassion to Vermin, Kraven realizes that Spider-Man was in fact a good man. He actually sees past the spider thing and actually realizes that maybe Kraven has been the spider to Spider-Man, the bad part to Spider-Man, which kind of changes everything. So Kraven basically lets Spider-Man go, tells him that don't worry about me, I basically finished my hunting, I will never hunt again. Spider-Man naturally doesn't really believe him, but he knows that Vermin is the more dangerous foe at this time, probably a character who will still go on to kill women, basically. So he goes off to find Vermin. Kraven meanwhile basically feels that he's at peace finally, and basically hasn't felt this peaceful in a very, very long time. So he actually decides to basically kill himself. Basically shoots himself in the head and ends it all. Very drastic ending really to a brilliant villain. The story actually continues though in Spectacular Spider-Man issue 132, where the police actually arrives at the Kraven estate and finds a confession that Kraven had basically made about him posing as Spider-Man, killing people and stuff. Spider-Man, meanwhile, is basically hunting Vermin down in the sewers, having some awful flashbacks and claustrophobic stuff and basically stuff like that. Eventually finds Vermin and fights him and is realizing that probably can't actually defeat him by just fighting him, but he actually needs to defeat him mentally too. So he basically tricked Vermin into hunting Spider-Man up to the surface, into the light, which is something that Vermin basically hates. And actually, through the whole confusion of the light and all, Spider-Man easily defeats Vermin and takes him into the police. The story ends with Kraven's people basically burying him at the estate. So this whole storyline is very deep and very dark, and it's basically sheds a different kind of light to villains overall, actually. I remember when I first read this, I was very surprised at the brutality of it. How Kraven basically just takes his life after burying Spider-Man for 2 whole weeks. I mean, this basically leaves some seriously damaging scars. Yeah, so that's it for today. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Do make sure to subscribe, to share, and like, and all that stuff. Of course, all of this is Marvel's creations. I'm only telling stories, so all props to them, basically. Yeah, I guess that's it. Stay safe and have a good day.